Psychosynthesis. Brief background. Psychosynthesis is a holistic approach to psychology developed by Roberto Assagioli, 1888 to 1974. Assagioli was a private person who preferred to focus attention on his professional work rather than his personal life. Thus, little biographical information is available on his life, particularly in English. However, the biographical information available indicates that Assagioli was born in Italy as Roberto Marco Grego. Assagioli's biological father died when Roberto was a young child. Assagioli's mother remarried shortly thereafter. During his youth, Assagioli was exposed to diverse languages, art, music, religions, and philosophies. Reportedly, he could speak 18 languages by the time he was 18 years of age. His family moved to Florence in 1904 to support Assagioli's decision to study medicine. He completed his medical degree in 1910, then traveled to Switzerland to complete training in psychiatry under the tutelage of Eugene Bleuler. While in Switzerland, Assagioli befriended C.G. Jung, whose work he viewed as most compatible with his views on the human psyche. Upon completing his psychiatric training, he started his first psychoanalytic practice in Italy. As part of his medical degree, he completed a dissertation on the topic psychosynthesis, which introduced his ideas and provided a critique of psychoanalysis. Throughout his life, Assagioli published numerous articles on psychosynthesis and psychoanalysis, and 3 books. Assagioli closed his practice to serve in World War I as an officer doctor. After his World War I service, he met and married his wife of 40 years, Nella Cepetti, and they had one son who died around 30 years of age from complications related to tuberculosis. His mother died in 1925, and shortly thereafter, Assagioli founded his first organization in Rome, Italy, dedicated to advancing psychotherapy and psychological training. The organization was forced to close by the fascist government of Mussolini around 1938, when it arrested and imprisoned Assagioli for his Jewish background, humanitarianism, and internationalism. However, Assagioli reportedly turned his time in prison into an opportunity for transformation as he focused on his inner world, including sitting hours every day in meditation and writing about his experiences. After release from prison, Assagioli and his family were forced to live underground as he was a target of Nazi aggression. Reportedly, the Nazis plundered and destroyed Assagioli's farm in Florence during this time. Thus, World War II was an extremely difficult time for him and his family. While he lost his son to illness associated with the evils of World War II, thankfully, Assagioli survived and afterward revived his organization, the Institute of Psychosynthesis in Florence, where he worked and lived until his death in 1974. Between 1946 and 1974, Assagioli lived a highly productive life, advancing the ideas of psychosynthesis through his writings, lectures, teachings, and private counseling work. Also, several psychosynthesis-oriented organizations and conferences began, with many of them still in operation today. Overview of the system. Psychosynthesis is a holistic approach to psychology that incorporates psychoanalysis, but significantly transcends it by emphasizing health, development, and spirituality. Assagioli illustrated his view of the human psyche in his egg diagram with 7 elements. Element 1, the lower unconscious. The lower unconscious, according to Assagioli, contains the basic psychological activities that conduct the operative and intelligent coordination of the body and bodily functions. This dimension of the psyche also holds one's foundational drives and animalistic urges, as well as emotionally intense established thematic patterns, dark dreams and fantasies, and some pathological disturbances such as paranoid delusions, uncontrollable urges, obsessions, and phobias. Element 2, the middle unconscious. The middle unconscious, according to Assagioli, includes psychological dimensions comparable to waking consciousness with ready access to it. Life experiences are integrated and standard cognitive and creative intelligence activated in a type of psychological incubation before entering the field of conscious awareness. Element 3, the higher unconscious or superconscious. The higher unconscious or superconscious is the region that holds our highest inspirations, aspirations, and intuitions for ourselves, humanity, and our world. This realm is also the source of our higher emotions, such as unconditional love and higher intelligences. It also holds the deeper experiences of insight, contemplation, and bliss, as well as potentials for higher spiritual experiences and psychic abilities. Element 4, the field of consciousness. For Assagioli, the field of consciousness, a term he thought useful but not quite precise, referred to the part of our personality of which we are conscious, including the thoughts, bodily sensations, emotions, desires, and impulses we are able to see and evaluate. Element 5, the conscious self or I. The conscious self or I is the term Assagioli used to refer to the point of pure awareness, not to be confused with the field of consciousness highlighted above, which refers to the content of experience. The conscious self or I refers to the experiencer. He compared the I to a projector light and the field of consciousness to a screen onto which images are projected. Element 6, the higher self. Unlike Freud's psychoanalysis, which only includes a lower unconscious, Assagioli's psychosynthesis includes the higher self or soul, depicted above the conscious self in the egg diagram. According to Assagioli, one can experience the higher self through the use of psycho-spiritual practices such as meditation. Element 7, the collective unconscious. Assagioli's collective unconscious, similar to Jung's conceptualization of the term, refers to universal, non-personal common forms or archetypes that surround and influence us on a collective level. Assagioli distinguished between primitive forms and higher progressive forces of a more spiritual nature. Although not depicted in Assagioli's original egg diagram, although some contemporary illustrations do include it, another key element of psychosynthesis is the concept of subpersonalities. Subpersonalities, similar to Jung's persona, refers to parts or formed habit patterns in the human psyche, conscious and unconscious, that we repeatedly express in our lives. For the healthy person, subpersonalities are conscious and in the field of self-awareness and self-regulation. In psychosynthesis, subpersonalities may reside in the lower, middle, or higher unconscious, unlike Jung's persona or false self. Additional fundamental concepts of psychosynthesis, which highlight stages of self-realization, include self-knowledge, self-control, disidentification, unifying center, and psychosynthesis as the peak stage in his model. Disidentification refers to the necessity of separating oneself, the conscious I, from over-identification with everything outside or beyond oneself. Over-identification can happen any time we identify with an aspect of our life experiences, such as subpersonality, our ethnicity, fear, anxiety, or role, to such an extent that it dominates our lives. Thus, healing and growth opportunities lie in seeing when and where one over-identifies, and with the help of exercises and practices, severing the control of the over-identification on oneself or I. Over time, former objects of over-identification can be healthily integrated into the middle unconscious and accessed more intentionally. The unifying center refers to the discovery or creation of an ideal around which one can reach or reorganize one's life. Psychosynthesis, in addition to referring to Assagioli's entire approach to psychotherapy, refers to the peak of the developmental process that establishes a new personality around a primary unifying center, one that is coherent, organized, and unified. Consequently, personal will, or the will, is a highly significant concept in psychosynthesis, such that Assagioli dedicated a book on the topic entitled The Act of Will. The will is an element of Assagioli's star diagram of 6 psychological functions, which he developed later in his life to complement the egg diagram of the psyche. Lamenting the state of psychology in 1958, Assagioli is quoted as saying, quote, "After losing its soul, psychology lost its will, and only then its mind and senses," end quote. In referring to the will, Assagioli wrote, "Who and what are we if not willers? By our very nature, we will, whether consciously or unconsciously, whether in a healthy or dysfunctional way. Assagioli proposed that healthy, mature adult human beings have wills that are strong, skillful, and good. By strong will, Assagioli meant the awareness and intentional use of will for living a rich and full life. By skillful will, Assagioli meant the capacity to obtain desired results with the least amount of effort. And by good will, Assagioli meant will applied in service to constructive action for oneself and others. Furthermore, Assagioli held the view of the existence of a transpersonal will, which he viewed as a dormant potentiality for most people. Assagioli's transpersonal will aligns with what Maslow referred to as higher needs, and the growing field of transpersonal psychology refers to using a variety of terms that include Christ consciousness, peak experiences, mystical experiences, being values, essence, bliss, awe, wonder, spirit, oneness, and other such similar concepts. As mentioned above, psychosynthesis proposes a dynamic 5-stage healing and realization process. Stage 0 highlights the predominant stage of humanity, characterized by what Assagioli called the fundamental infirmity of man. John Furman referred to this human condition as primal wounding, wounding resulting from not being seen and heard for who we truly are by significant others in our lives. Stage 1 relates to the tuning in of one's inner experience and the cultivation of greater self-awareness. Self-awareness is the foundation of all growth and development. Without self-awareness, we tend to react out of instinct and habitual responses, or what Furman referred to as the survival personality. As self-awareness expands, we start to see our tendencies, preferences, and shortcomings. Eventually, we, often with the help of supportive practices or a skilled guide, begin to free ourselves or disidentify from our habitual thoughts, feelings, reactions, and roles, thereby cultivating the witness or individual observer I, stage 2. Over time, we may start sensing a more expansive identity and or connectedness to life and begin to feel new vocational urges, creative impulses, or directive promptings, stage 3. From a psychosynthesis perspective, this involves surrendering and inviting a more intimate, conscious relationship with the higher self or soul. The 4th stage of psychosynthesis corresponds to a period in which we are formally responding to the invitations of the higher self, in contrast to the personal self or ego in its contemporary usage, and developing more spiritually. Survival of wounding, exploration of the personality, the emergence of I, contact with the highest self, and response to the highest self represents the 5 stages of psychosynthesis. However, Assagioli and others, for example, John Furman and Ann Gillia, caution that these stages do not represent a set of developmental sequence, but potential responses to the human condition that may occur at any age. Core practices. It is important to note that Assagioli presented psychosynthesis in 2 subcategories: personal psychosynthesis and transpersonal psychosynthesis. The emphasis of personal psychosynthesis are self-awareness and self-regulation. The foci of transpersonal psychosynthesis are on the realization of one's highest self or soul, and the actual psychosynthesis, the reformation of the personality around a new unifying center or ideal. Numerous practices and exercises align with psychosynthesis overall and in these 2 categories. Thus, to identify a narrow set of core practices is inconsistent with this reality. However, it is fair to say that visualization, drawing, self-observation, and meditation are common practices among psychosynthesis-oriented counselors, therapists, and coaches. In addition, as highlighted above, disidentification is a core concept of psychosynthesis, and activities aimed at freeing oneself from over-identifying with a dimension of our being or life other than the center of pure awareness or I. For example, Assagioli offered this exercise for disidentification. Affirm with conviction the following: I have a body, but I am not my body. I have an emotional life, but I am not my emotions or feelings. I have an intellect, but I am not that intellect. I am I, a center of pure consciousness. Given today's pressing global challenges and the subsequent demands on human beings, psychosynthesis offers a holistic and hope-filled paradigm for the journey toward healing, well-being, self-actualization, and self-realization.